to take away that fear of death as well. This book makes it quite a beautiful thing. It makes death quite beautiful. I cried buckets during the chapter when they're talking about his funeral. I cried and cried. My face hurt. I was crying so much.
I met you, I think, Esther, correct me if I'm wrong here, was it back in February this year? I think it would have been January, February.
Yeah, yeah.
And just to give our listeners an idea of how quick people can change, I mean, I didn't know, I had met you before. We had met before we met in Cardiff in the network meeting. And to see the change from you when I first met you to you now is just remarkable.
Really?
You know, and I don't know whether it's something you notice, because sometimes when it's changing so quickly for yourself, it's hard to recognize it from inside, isn't it? But
I kind of like photographs of myself more than I used to, but that's about it.
Well, that's a good start. I really think you've changed, and even from us having the first conversation, and you tell me a little bit about your background and what, you know, your change and your journey into yoga. Really inspired me as well, and I'm sure you inspire other people around you. So do you want to give a little bit of background, Esther, just about, I mean, I think you've had quite a sudden, you know, a dramatic change into where you are now. So how did you get involved in yoga? What was your life like before? Where do you see it going from here? And how do you help other people?
Well, I've been going to yoga for years. I've been going to yoga classes for quite a long time, which started after I had an asthma attack about 8 years ago, I think. And I went to yoga because I thought that would help me to breathe. And it didn't really teach me to breathe, but I fell in love with doing the postures because I was quite flexible. I could do it, and I'm not the most sporty people, so it was nice to have something in the sports centre that I could actually do. So I started going to yoga classes quite regularly, but it was only ever the physical side of yoga. I never really explored the more spiritual aspect of it, and in the years that I was going, I never really learned to breathe. All that time I was very stressed. It wasn't really doing anything to help the very, very stressed out mental state I was in. I was permanently stressed. I was drinking way too much. I'd had a drinking problem for years. And so I was going to yoga, and I was having this sort of hour and a half of peace on my yoga mat, and then very often just going back home to a bottle of wine and a packet of fags. So it wasn't really changing my life in any way. It wasn't really touching me inside. It was only making my body feel better. But it was really important to me, and I knew that at some point in my life I was going to want to teach it, because I'm a teacher by, I don't know, vocation, I think, really. My parents were teachers. I trained as a teacher. I think I was always meant to be a teacher. And then 2 years ago, I'd had a really difficult year, and I was having, life just kind of kept dumping on me over and over again, and I reached a point in the summer where I couldn't cope anymore. And I think I had a nervous breakdown. I'm pretty sure I did. I never went to get medical confirmation of it, but I would say by my behaviour at the time, I almost certainly had a breakdown. And I gave up my full-time job and realised that I couldn't possibly manage my full-time job, my family worries, and being a single mum all at the same time. And then I carried on drinking and smoking very heavily, and realised that, you know, I was okay for a couple of years. I could stay on income support and just manage, but I needed to think in terms of what I was going to do in the future, because I wasn't going to go on job seekers allowance. There was no way I could do that.
Just to ask clear, when you were kind of like at your most stressed point, was that the job, you know, was it everything, or was it just pure overwhelm from everything that's happening?
Yeah, it was a combination of numerous factors. I mean, I'd always been quite a high stress person anyway. I think I'd suffered from, you know, varying mental health conditions over the years, ranging from depression to eating disorders and anxiety disorders. I think I've had quite a few that have never really been dealt with. I've dealt with them by getting drunk and stoned and smoking too much. So I had all this going on anyway, and then in the start of 2013, I had job insecurities when there were problems in the organisation. I had family health worries to deal with. I had a very unpleasant, acrimonious breakup with my ex, and we had issues about the contact with our son. And it was just all this stuff piling on top of me. And as soon as I kind of started dealing with one thing, there was something else to deal with. And it just felt like, I mean, looking back now, I feel like it was life telling me, right now, you've got to do something. Now, you can't carry on like this. You need to stop. But at the time, it felt like life was trying to grind me into the ground. You know, it was just overwhelming. And I left one job and started in a new job, which was just, I felt so out of my depth because I wasn't mentally or emotionally equipped to deal with a high pressure job, which I would have loved a year previously. But I just wasn't equipped to deal with it, and I felt isolated. I felt like nobody cared because they didn't know me. And that was kind of like the last straw then that just pushed me over the edge, I think. But I think looking back now, it was all quite good because it got me to a place where I needed to stop and take a break. And you have to break down to break through moment. I needed to fall apart because in that falling apart, I could see what a mess I was in. Finally, I could see, because I hadn't seen it. I'd just been living it. So I could finally see that I was in this absolutely terrible state and I needed to do something. And that's when I discovered yoga.
I think in human trend, we always have to hit rock bottom before we fundamentally change everything, you know, and it's like, and you see it again and again, everyone hits their worst state before they start the climb. And there's a Taoist quote, I don't know if you guys know this, but Taoists believe that, like yin and yang, yin always has to reach its most extreme state before it flips and turns to yang. And it's an energy thing as how they believe it. You know, you have to reach that point of you can't cope anymore before you start on a brand new journey. And I don't know, it's a common trait, I think.
Yeah,
I think when people make big changes.
I think so, and I think I think it's an age-old thing, but I think now in our society we're not encouraged to accept that we can't cope. And we're told we've got to carry on. So we carry on not recognizing that, you know, you're drowning in it. And it does take, you have to just fall apart before you realize what's going on with you. Yeah, it's definitely true of most people, I think.
Do you think that's potentially kind of, I suppose, like the masculinization of our society? You know, women feeling that they are being pushed to be sort of more masculine in the workplace and kind of having to compete kind of as equals. Do you think that's potentially the thing that's made us, you know, less prepared to ask for help and stuff? Because, you know, let's face it, men have never been good at asking for directions, right?
Yeah, I'm not very good at asking for directions.
Yeah, I think potentially. Also, though, I think there's always been such a stigma attached to, like, admitting failure, hasn't there? You know, and admitting weakness in society and in the workplace. It's just like, you know, you don't show that weak side of you because then you're exposing yourself. I think society has kind of driven us to that.
Yeah.
Over the years.
And I mean, I know in my particular situation, because of the very acrimonious breakup, if I'd admitted to my ex that I wasn't coping, he would have just swooped in. And well, maybe he wouldn't have, but that was my fear, was that if I was to say, I have these problems, if I was to admit to him that I really did think that I had all the mental health issues that he'd accused me of, that, you know, all of my problems, I felt threatened by, and I felt that if I'd admitted to those, then I was, you know, at risk of losing my son or having social services come in and telling me, you're not a very good mother, are you? And there was all that fear attached to it as well. And you know, we don't like to make ourselves vulnerable, but I think it's like that. Brené Brown. It's the strongest thing you can do is to actually say, I'm vulnerable here, please help me. Because that's, you do what you need to do.
Yeah, it comes back to the fear again, I guess, doesn't it? Which is in all of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So alongside all of this, Esther, you were continuing your yoga practice, but on a very physical level.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, by this point, I had done a course that was looking at things on a little bit more of a deeper level, but it didn't really fit with me at the time. But then when I sort of remembered that I'd always wanted to teach yoga, and it was something that I kept coming back to time after time. I would look at every now and then for yoga teacher training that I could do. Then at this right time, I found one in Cardiff, and this particular yoga philosophy just really, whether it was timing, I think it was probably timing that this came into my life at the right time, but all of a sudden the philosophy, the spiritual aspect of it, all just made so much sense. I think because I was sitting there surrounded by a million pieces of myself, I could suddenly see the benefits of actually thinking about things a little bit deeper rather than just, is this going to give me a flat belly, which was really all I cared about before.
You're not alone. Wow. So, I mean, if we talk of that kind of lowest moment, is there a particular moment in time that springs to your mind where you just sat with yourself and was like, I can't do this anymore, this has to change? And was there anyone who inspired you in that moment as well? Even, people around you, like you mentioned your son. Sometimes I think we look for inspiration in, mentors and people who we look up to, but sometimes it can be somebody in everyday life, that inspires you more than anything.
When I was at my lowest, like when I made the decision to give up my job, it was just a decision that I just made because I knew that I couldn't face going back to work the next week, really. The lowest moment, when I think about that summer, the whole time of deciding I was going to give up my job and recognizing that I was really falling apart, was when I'd already decided to give up the job, and I'd spoken to my boyfriend at the time and my best friend about that, and got their kind of, not approval, but their support that they would be there for me if I give up my job. And then we were at Beautiful Days Festival, and I had to drive home on my own. And I'd had probably way too much to drink the previous night, so I wasn't feeling great considering I had to drive home from Devon. And I was quite upset at leaving the festival because I didn't want to leave, I wanted to stay. And I got stuck in a big traffic jam. And I was listening to some music loud and just singing away and trying to make the best of this journey when I suddenly realised that something was not right with the car. And there was this horrible clanking noise. I stopped the car on the lay-by and got out, and there was a bit of the exhaust hanging off. Now, I don't know the first thing about repairing cars, so the only thing I could do, and I just sat down and I burst into tears. And I sat there for a couple of minutes, just sobbing like, somebody I loved had just died. It was that much anguish. And then I got in the car because I didn't really want to be sitting on the M5, obviously crying in the lay-by. So I got into the car and I carried on crying, and I really don't know I didn't know what I was going to do. I had no battery in my phone to ring anyone. I was really stuffed as far as I could see. And this couple stopped, and the woman came over to me, put her arms through the window of the car and gave me a hug. And the man went under the car and pulled off the bit of the exhaust and said, "It's fine, you carry on driving." And those two saved me that day. And they did tell me their names. They gave me their address. They said that if I needed any further help, I could go to their house and they would sort me out and everything. And I was fine the rest of the way home. But they were like two angels. They really saved me that day. So when I was feeling absolutely low, they kind of just lifted my spirits really to show me that there were good people out there, because I was feeling like lost, completely lost, and that moment of just that woman hugging me just brought me back and just gave me so much hope. And then I went home and calculated my income support rate and realized I definitely could, and I absolutely needed to give up my job, because for something like that to have affected me the way it did, I clearly couldn't go back to work. I needed to change my life quite drastically. So yeah, those two people were my heroes that weekend, and for quite a long time afterwards as well.
I can imagine, yeah. Wow. Well, sometimes it's timing, like you said, and those were the right people to come along at that time to help you.
Yeah, yeah.
You mentioned, Esther, about drinking too much and smoking too much and everything else. How much do you think that contributed to you reaching that low?
Oh, created it completely. Now that I don't drink and I don't smoke and I breathe properly and I'm healthy and I'm happy, I can see now that where I was using alcohol and cigarettes to help me deal with life, I was actually creating so many problems for myself because I'd stay up all night, or not all night, but I'd stay up really late drinking. Then I'd wake up in the morning having not had enough sleep, having not had a good sleep, try to get ready for work. I'd be stressed, I'd be tired, I'd be grumpy, I'd be hungover, I'd be in a terrible state in the mornings getting the kids ready for school. I'd go to work, I'd feel like crap all day, and I wouldn't sleep. I'd be very tired, so I'd be drinking coffee all night, all day long, and then I wouldn't be able to sleep, so I'd be drinking, and it was just this cycle of not being able to sleep, so drinking wine to help me sleep and then drinking coffee to help myself stay awake all day and just not functioning very well. And I mean, I've since learned that the liver is associated with anger, so I was creating this anger that I kind of lived with for all my life. I just seem to remember being angry for most of my life, and a lot of the time it was directed at myself or at the people around me or at political decisions and world events, but it was just this anger that was there waiting for any excuse to erupt out of me, and the slightest provocation would set me off. And since I've stopped drinking, I don't have that anymore, and I just know that where I thought I was solving problems, or at least giving myself a tool to help me deal with my problems, I wasn't dealing with anything. I was creating countless problems for myself. Not, health, relationships, everything was being affected by it. So yeah, I have realized that now, and it's been such an eye-opener just how much we do create these problems for ourselves without even realizing it.
I think that's a lot of people, Esther, and I can hold my hands up. I used to be in a similar camp, and you would work the week, the long hours, and drink each night to try and forget about going into work the next day. And you're right, it's very simple to slip into that cycle.
Yeah.
And very easy not to see it, to not recognize it yourself at the time as well.
Absolutely. It's only when you try and start to try and take control of it that you suddenly realize you can't.
Yeah.
That's what's scary about addiction, is that you just don't see it coming. I can remember when for probably about 10 years of smoking, I was completely convinced I wasn't addicted to cigarettes. And then I started trying to give up. And then I realized several attempts, many attempts to give up convinced me I was completely addicted.
Within that time, I know, like, one of the questions I fired across to you was like, how readily do you ask for help? So within that time when you were drinking, you were caught in that cycle, were the points in there where you like really wanted to cry out for help and admit that you had a problem, but you just felt that admitting it, like we've said, society just wouldn't accept it?
I think I've done it all my life. I've realized a lot now, because I spend quite a lot of time sort of looking back and working things out about myself. And I've for most of my life, there have been times when I really should have asked for help, and I either didn't ask or I asked the wrong people. I did live, and shoot myself in the foot completely by not asking the one person who can help me for whatever reason, or being too scared to ask for help, because sometimes in the past that hasn't worked out so well for me with certain things. I have asked for help, I have made myself vulnerable, and it's kind of resulted in me getting stabbed in the back. So I learned from fairly early on in my life that actually asking for help is quite dangerous, and so it's easier to plow on. And the amount of situations I've got myself into over the years that could have been easily avoided if I just held my hands up and said, help, I'm struggling, can somebody, would you please help me? Asking the right person, asking anybody for help. You know, things to do with money. If I've had money problems simply because I'd rather not open the envelope, not deal with the issue. With my health, I've sat there and worried about what I'm doing to my health with drinking, but I've never gone to the doctor and said, "Hi, I think I've got a drink problem." Because it's too scary to make myself that vulnerable. So no, I've never been any good at it, and it's something that I'd like to think I'm better at now. But at the same time, if I'm being strictly honest, I don't actually think I'm much better at it now. I just don't think I'm getting myself into the same stupid situations anymore.
Yeah.
But you're more open to asking for help now. Is that? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
What you're saying is, you know, that whilst you might not practice it, you see the value in it, and it's kind of something you're working towards, right?
Yeah, definitely. Oh, I can definitely see the value in it, and I am more likely to ask for help now. If I need it, I'm not so nervous about asking people for help anymore. But I would rather, I'm still very much, I'll battle on and try and work it out for myself first. But it just doesn't take me quite so long to get to the I need to ask stage now. So I am improving.
So just sort of going backwards slightly and talking a little bit more about sort of your challenges with alcohol and stuff. Do you think, you know, when you think of addiction, do you think of addiction as being a choice or something that just happens? You know, is it a choice? Do you choose to be an addict?
Nobody would choose to be an addict. I can't think of any reason why you would make that choice. I don't think anybody anywhere in the world chooses to become addicted to something. You choose to take the substance. But I mean, research will tell you that most people who drink don't become alcoholics. Most people who take cocaine don't become addicted to it. There are, excuse me, just going to switch my phone off. There are a small number of people who will become addicted to a substance, and there's all kinds of different factors that affect whether you're going to become addicted. And it's not the physical things. I became addicted to alcohol not because of the physical cravings for the alcohol. I became addicted because what was going on up here with how I felt about myself, with how I felt about my place in the world. It wasn't about the substance. It could have been any substance. It could have been food. It could have been TV. It could have been sex. It could have been anything. I have got quite that sort of, I will attach to something. Susan might have seen on my Facebook post, I get very attached and excitable about going to see a music gig. And so I could have gone down that, you know, becoming completely obsessed with following rock bands around the country, around the world. Your addiction can be anything, and it's not about the substance, it's about the feeling that it gives you. And in my case, I wanted to escape. I sought oblivion, and I found it very easily in alcohol. I didn't choose to become alcohol dependent or an alcoholic. I chose escape. I wanted escape from myself and from the life that I created for myself. Nobody chooses to become an addict.
Do you think, Esther, that because alcohol is one of our most readily available substances, you know, even for youngsters these days, underage as well, that it tends to be the first point of addiction? If you've got an addictive personality anyway, or you can, you know, you get a bit obsessed with a certain thing, it seems to be that one that's so easy to get hold of, isn't it? Again and again and again. Whereas, you know, yoga could become an addiction. But
people do become addicted to yoga, and that's just as harmful then if you're doing it because you're completely addicted to it. It's not serving you well then.
Yeah.
I think these days for kids, smartphones are the first point of addiction.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, you look at them; they can't function without them. But in terms of you know, substances, then yeah, alcohol is far too readily available, and our culture tells us that it's perfectly acceptable. You know, even the Friday night piss up. Would you rather I didn't use that word? Even the Friday night boom.
You carry on.
is culturally acceptable in Britain.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's the norm for people to get so drunk that they can't walk properly, that they can't remember. I've seen people I mean, I know I used to do it myself. I'm going to get so drunk tonight, I'm not going to be able to remember it tomorrow. What kind of ambition is that for your Friday night? You know, and that's our cultural norm. And it's, you know, if you're celebrating something, you do it with alcohol. If you're commiserating, you do it with alcohol. If you want to meet with friends, you go for a drink. There's nothing to do that doesn't involve, you know, it's so hard, particularly where I live. It's nigh on impossible to find something to do that doesn't involve going to the pub or dragging people walking up mountains, which I'd be quite happy to do, but they don't all want to do that. So, you know, when in our society, we're told that it's fine until you develop a problem. And then the stereotype of the alcoholic is the dirty old tramp with a bottle in his pocket and a brown paper bag. Well, that's not helpful, because that's not what alcoholics look like. Alcoholics look like me. They look like you. They look like anybody that's walking down the street could be an alcoholic, and you don't know. So, you know, we got that weird juxtaposition of attitudes there, that it's fine to get drunk, it's fine to get into a right mess. But then don't develop a problem, because we don't want to know that, and we're just going to, you know, you're disgusting then. And then there's no wonder that people are scared to ask for help when they realise or when they think they have got a problem.
There's definitely a misconception about what an alcoholic is. You know, I think we live in a society, like you say, where people think, you know, that if you're an alcoholic, you sleep on a park bench. If you're an alcoholic, you drink as soon as you wake up in the morning.
Yeah, or you only drink whiskey,
or whatever, you know. And I think there are so many rules in people's minds as to what does or doesn't make an alcoholic. But I think in reality, actually, and there's a lot of research and stuff coming out that backs this up at the moment. We've actually got an increasing drink problem through binge drinking that is potentially, you know, depending on your definitions, could be classed as alcoholic drinking. And it's quite often people who've got successful careers, who, you know, they're at work, a bit like we've been talking about already, you know, they're at work and they're counting down the hours to when they can have their first drink. And then when they do have that first drink, they don't just have one drink, they have, you know, they drink to oblivion. And then the cycle starts again the following day. But because they go all day without drinking, because, you know, they're not necessarily, how can I put it? Because they're in a position where they're seen to be successful in so many other areas of their life, that is quite often then viewed as, you know, not as this is a functioning alcoholic, but actually this is aspirational, and it's just that this person's a big drinker.
Yeah.
You know, and it's scary, because, I mean, certainly I grew up in an environment where, you know, the more you could drink, if you could drink more than your friends, that was a skill to brag about, right? That was a cool thing, you know. If you can only drink X pints and I can drink X plus one, then, you know, it was something to be proud of. But I think for me, at least, I think that the difference comes when you go from I'm trying to think how the best to explain this. When you go from just drinking to using alcohol, you know, when it becomes a crutch for you, and it's the same with anything. Yeah, for me at least, that's what I believe a kind of an addictive behaviour to be, is when you use something to support or justify other things in your life that it's not really meant to be there for. You know, if it's a bit like we were saying about the you know, drinking to celebrate, drinking to commiserate. I think if every day you can find your reason and you have to do it every day, then that's when it's starting to become something different. Or when you've got problems in your life that, you know, rather than deal with the problems, I'm just going to go out and get pissed instead. That's when it's starting to become an addictive behaviour. And I think you're dead right, Esther, when you say that, you know, there's so many things that can fall into that camp. You know, I mean, for me, you know, I do a lot of distance running. You know, that could very easily fall into that camp of, do you know what, I've got all these things to deal with that are really important in my life, and I'm just going to ignore them and run away. You know, and it's finding, it's that addictive, I say from my perspective at least, that addictive behaviour is when you're doing abnormal when you're taking something and using it in an abnormal way, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess it's that word of like avoidance. So you're avoiding the issue and replacing it with something else that seems easier in a way, isn't it? You know, an alternative that is an easy fallback, I guess, or an escapism.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
definitely. It was escapism for me, and it was, well, as I don't know if you've seen Johann Hari's talk about addiction, and he talks about addiction as not being able to bear to be present in your own life. And that, to me, when I saw that video, and I must have paused that video and rewound that little tiny segment, and I wrote it down a couple of times, and it really resonated with me, because that is exactly what it was for me. I was using alcohol because I couldn't actually bear to be who I was at the precise moment that I was. I couldn't bear me. I couldn't bear to be myself. I couldn't connect to who I was. And he talks about addiction as being not being able to connect, and it's that feeling of disconnect. And I mean, I drank socially. I had friends that I drank with, but I was always quite disconnected from myself. So I would drink because then I could create this personality that was Esther when she's drunk. And I knew how to be her. I didn't really know how to be sober Esther. And so it's about, you know, it's that feeling of just not being quite comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah, I get, yeah, like not being willing to get to know yourself because
I
you
couldn't bear
almost,
being on my own. I hated being on my own. If I
yeah,
was on my own, I'd feel like I was somehow failing because I wasn't with somebody, that somebody else didn't want to be with me, and because I couldn't actually stand my own company. So then that would lead me to, well, of course nobody wants to be with you, you know, and it would lead me onto this terrible cycle of horrible things I'd say to myself, so that I'd go get some wine to numb that out, but then that voice would get louder, so it didn't help anyway.
yeah, it's the back to that voice in our heads again, isn't it, you know? And that battle between what we consciously think and what that voice is saying.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I bet you love time alone now, Esther, a bit of peace and quiet.
I do. I enjoy being on my own now, particularly if I'm out walking or on my yoga mat. But, yeah, no, I do. It's fine. I'm quite happy with who I am these days.
You just mentioned, Esther, just one of the questions I fired over about, you know, children's addictions to smartphones and gadgets these days. And you're so right. And you actually gave me the recommendation of the book, and you're going to have to remind me. What was the book? Say that again?
I Disorder.
That's it, a fantastic book, which 2 weeks after I'd read it all, after you mentioned it, and I mean, some of the research that he's got. Who was the author again? Can you remember?
I can't remember his name, no. No, I can't off the top of my head, no.
Okay, well, the book, for anyone listening, the book's called I Disorder, and it basically delves really deep, Esther, doesn't it, into the psychology behind addiction to smartphones and technology and how we can't switch off these days. Yeah, frightening, some frightening stats and information in there, but eye-opening stuff.
Transparency and full disclosure, I read 2 chapters and couldn't read anymore because I was like, my God, that's me!
You had to pick your smartphone up instead.
Larry Rosen. I've just Googled it. It's Larry Rosen.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So, out of interest, then, out of that admission you've just given us, have things changed? Because one of the questions we asked you was how quickly or how soon in the morning do you pick up your phone?
My phone's my alarm clock.
Is that an excuse?
Well, yeah, I have actually. It's funny, since you asked that question, that's made me really think, because my phone is my alarm clock, so obviously it's the first thing I pick up in the morning. And very often, obviously, you know, it's connected to my Wi-Fi, so I get all the notifications. So sometimes I put it on airplane mode before I go to bed, so that I do have that little bit of delay. And sometimes I'll actually manage to get to my yoga mat before I check anything.
Great.
But very often I'll use the excuse of, oh, I got to check my bank account.
Yeah.
I don't have to do that at 5 o'clock in the morning. That's nonsense. It doesn't matter. Nothing's going to change. I can't go to the bank until 9, But I use that as an excuse. But yeah, I have actually been looking. I'm trying to get, so if anybody listening to this knows where I can get, I want an old-fashioned alarm clock that doesn't have a snooze button and that doesn't need charging. So I can leave my phone downstairs, because I would love to be able to have no technology in my bedroom and just read books at bedtime instead of Facebook.
Yeah,
Because kind of, I'm still working on my smartphone addiction.
I think we all are, if I'm honest, and I am without a doubt, you know, especially if your day-to-day work and what you do involves being online, you know, and that communication or creating things and putting it out there. It's really, really difficult. It's difficult to switch off. It really is.
And what I found is I set a goal for myself this month, because what your question really did get me thinking. I mean, I've thought before, but it really got me thinking. And I set a goal for myself to reduce my dependence on my technology. And then, about 20 minutes later, I don't know, I went and set up a gratitude challenge for the whole of September. So I've got to be on Facebook for the whole of September.
But you're grateful for it.
I'm very grateful for it. And it's actually serving a real purpose. It's not just me going on Facebook because I feel like scrolling through pages and pages and pages of nonsense.
Yeah.
But it's like, as soon as I set myself that goal, I managed to create a really, really compelling reason why I had to carry on, which I do all the time. Every time I think, that's it, I'm going to have a week off from Facebook, I think, oh, but I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. And we just tell ourselves we've got to do it all the time.
I think that's when the people are there, you know, if the people you want to speak to and get your message to are on Facebook, if you've got the intention, like you said, you set the gratitude challenge, which is a hugely positive thing, you're going on there with a good intention rather than just going on and scrolling, I guess. So there's a borderline, isn't there? There's a difference that we all kind of...
I'm using it differently now.
Yeah,
I am definitely using it differently. I mean, my online time today has been mostly about finding content, creating content for it and talking to people on there. And so I'm using it differently. I'm not scrolling through other people's stuff as much as I have done. So it's changing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is. I'm talking to people that I want to talk to rather than just reading all about terrible things that are happening in the world and pictures of cats and stuff.
There's a phrase I've heard a few times that I think is great, which is create more than you consume. So
yes.
So use the internet, use social media, whatever, but create more than you consume. So don't spend all day reading, like you say, things about cats or what somebody's score is in Candy Crush or whatever it happens to be. Ignore all that stuff. Find the valuable bits and add value. Put something valuable out there.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do now. Figure out how I can do that is something challenging, but I'm working on my project for this month, and then I'll figure out other stuff next month.
I love the sound of the gratitude challenge. That's a great one, Esther. It really is.
It's really good. You should join him.
I will. I'm going to look at it when we're off on the interview. I'll look it up.
It's really good.
Sadly, by the time this gets out, it may well be over or nearly over. So apologies to anyone who's listening to this thinking, where is this challenge? I want to sign up.
The group will still be there, still being positive.
Good stuff. So, Esther, the yoga side of it, and you started teaching yoga.
Yes.
How has that changed you from taking it from being somebody who practices yoga to then helping others and teach others to get into the habit of doing yoga? Has that changed you?
It's really good. I love teaching. I love teaching it. I want to teach more. It's really good because I'm really glad that I did the training that I did and that I've been on the journey that I've been on with it, that I haven't just learned how to get people into postures, that I've gone into this much deeper place. Because when I talk to people about the benefits of yoga now, I can talk from such great personal experience, and I can see how I can really help people. Yeah. And I can see in the people who come to my class regularly, I can see changes in them, even after just a few sessions. I can see real difference, and in the way that not just, I love the transformation in somebody from the time they come into the class to the time they leave. you know, by the time they've gone through an hour and a half of doing the postures and the breathing and the relaxation, any worries that they've come to the class with have kind of just melted away at the end of that anyway. But seeing the difference in how people are coming to the classes, you know, like a couple of students who would come really stressed after work, and they'd be bringing work with them, and they'd be really, you could see that whether they'd had a bad day or not. And now they're coming in and they look totally different before the class even starts. So and it's lovely to see people's confidence in their postures improve it, and people's bodies changing, and just people's eyes, you can see it in their eyes that it's having such a difference. And so from where I'm standing, that's wonderful, because I've never had been in a job where I've had such real life, like, affirming feedback. You know, I've been told I'm doing my job well in the past before, but that's not quite the same as being able to say I'm actually making a real difference in somebody's life. So I've worked in jobs in the third sector before, where, you know, you think you're making a big difference, and lots of people are in the third sector, but I don't think the jobs I was doing were ever really actually making that much difference in people's lives. But now I know that I am making a difference in people's lives, and that's incredible. That's kind of what I want to do. So, you know, I'm getting to do the thing I love, and it's having the effects that I want from what I do. So it's great.
And you're being able to see it like one-to-one as well.
Yeah.
You know, which must be amazing, really, to see the transformation. Because I've been practicing yoga myself, but only really kind of the way you just spoke about it, Esther, about getting the spiritual side of it. Like I do a lot of meditation anyway. I'd never connected the meditative state with yoga before. But since I've been practicing it, like you said, there's a deeper level. And just one session, like you said, it can make the whole weight of the world just disappear within an hour. And if you can offer that to, you know, 30 people or whatever in a class, that's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, no, it is. And I mean, you get so many benefits. Even if you just do one yoga session, you get so many mental and physical and emotional benefits from that one session. It changes your body. It changes how your body's functioning on so many levels. It's a remarkable thing. It really is. Yeah.
Have you got any questions at the moment, Neil, you want to just put in there? Because I was just going to go back to the other question I put across to you, Esther, and that was about fear. And we've spoken quite a bit about fear, you know, the fear with addiction, the fear of admission, the fear of not fitting into society. Do you see any aspect within that fear from what you've gone through or what you've seen others go through that can be positive? You know, that fear can really instigate you to make the change. Is fear a friend or a foe, or can it be both?
I think it's both. I think it depends on how you use it. I mean, fear can leave you in paralysis and can leave you scared to progress, to you know, like I was saying before about my problems before. I was in fear then, and I was too scared to do anything about it before, because I was scared of the consequences. And I think that's what it comes down to, is the consequences. If the consequences are worse, it depends on what the consequences are, or what the perceived consequences are. Like right now, I'm scared because I'm broke. My finances are not great, and I'm scared. My biggest fear at the moment is that I'm going to end up having to take a job at some point. That's the worst fear in the world for me right now, is that I'm going to apply for a job. But that fear, I'm not going to let that fear send me into paralysis. That fear is going to motivate me to make pretty well sure I don't end up having to get a job, because I've never been as happy in any job I've been in as I have been this last year, even though I'm not earning huge amounts of money. I'm not earning much money at all. I'm getting so much more satisfaction from what I'm doing now. I know I couldn't possibly go and sit in an office from 9 to 5 again. I'd end up back where I was.
Yeah.
That fear, the fear of, that is the one thing that keeps me going. That fear that I could end up back where I was, that's my best friend. Because that fear is what gets me to my yoga mat. That fear is what keeps me eating healthily. That fear is what keeps me looking forward instead of looking back negatively. I look back a lot, because I learned from my past now. I look back, but I don't look back as in, nostalgia for the past or fear of the future, but that fear that I could end up back where I was, that is my best friend, and I keep that with me at all times because I am not going back there. I'm very grateful to that person that I was because she taught me an awful lot, but I don't ever want to see her again. So yeah, it depends on what the fear is and what you do with it. I mean, fear or a rational fear that what you're doing is harming you is a really good one because that can motivate you to change. I spend a lot of time being deeply, deeply fearful of what's going on out there in the world and fearful for the future. And, looking at the news and just being scared of the future for my children, which then led me to being a terrible mother because I was so busy worrying about the future that I wasn't looking at what I was doing in the past. So that was not a very helpful fear. But now my fear for my future, for my son's future, I use that to make sure he has a really great present. And so that he grows up with the skills and being confident in my love and that I'm giving him everything that he needs now, so that he'll grow up into the sort of person that can survive whatever the future's got to throw at him, because I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen in 5 years, never mind in 15 when he's an adult.
It's amazing, isn't it? If you just flip it to not think about the future and, like you said, concentrate on the present and be mindful, that'll create your future anyway.
Exactly, yeah, and it was when I realised that I was in worrying about his future and being such a terrible mother because I was worrying about the future. I was actually creating the very thing that I was so scared of because I was so distant from him, because I was so busy reading the bloody news that, I was creating that. I was telling him that, I don't know what messages I was sending to him, but they weren't good. So yeah, it is. It's turning the fear on its head and using it rather than letting it use you.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, Esther. It's using it as a driving force, isn't it? Instead of being scared of it, use it to your advantage as a driving force to either steer you away from something, what you don't want, or towards your dreams, really, and what you do want.
Yeah, which is what fear is supposed to be. I mean, it's a very useful primal instinct, and it is there to keep us safe.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's not how we're supposed to live our lives. We're not supposed to be in a permanent state of fear. It's just to be there to protect us from things that will harm us. So we just got to use it like that.
Absolutely.
I've heard that when we're born we only have two fears, and they are the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises, and every other fear we learn.
Yeah.
And so, you're dead right that it's there to keep us safe. And I think some of the fears we learn are, how can I put it, they're not necessarily helpful fears, and some fears are. And and sometimes I think the things that we're afraid of, or the fears that we have, actually, if we go back and look at them later, it's like, why was I ever afraid of doing that? And it was probably protecting us from something in that moment, which is why we were afraid. But it's almost like we need to, from my perspective, it's almost like we need to keep our fears in, how can I put it, kind of keep them in check. We need to go back and just say, is this fear still useful to me? Is this still a fear that's actually serving me, or is it a fear I'm better off getting rid of? And that doesn't mean you can just click your finger and the fear's gone.
Yeah.
No, it takes a bit of a mindset shift.
But absolutely. But quite often we have fears that don't serve us, that actually are not genuine fears either. And it's surprising how straightforward sometimes it can be to get rid of them. Just by kind of pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zone and realizing actually there was nothing to be afraid of in the first place.
Yeah, feel the fear and do it anyway is the quote, isn't it? Yeah. Sometimes I think our fears can be imposed from other people around us as well. So they're not even our fears, and we still take them on board. We still get scared about it, but
absolutely, and we learn them from our parents, we learn them from the people around us as we go. Yeah, absolutely.
And like you said, Esther, as well, like society and news, press and things like that as well. It's so fear-driven that you've really got to, you've got to be in control of yourself there for what you take on board and what you really start worrying about, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Because the press would have us scared all the time.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I think like teenage generation, I've kind of taken less notice of press just now, or they're absorbing it in a different way. So mainstream press is not their route to get the information. I think that's a good thing, you know. Yes, they're taking on a lot of bombardment of information from online and from social media, but mainstream press, I think they're kind of switched off from a bit.
Well, I don't know. I only know my son. My son reads the BBC, but I know he reads an awful lot of other stuff as well. I know he reads Al Jazeera. So he looks at things from a very broad perspective.
Yeah.
And he doesn't seem to have any fears for his future. He seems to be fairly confident that he's going to be just fine. And that's good. My 18-year-old,
yeah, that must be great.
5-year-old, he's not reading the BBC news. But yeah, no, so yeah. I mean, they're so exposed to it that they. I know a friend of mine from London was saying that in London, when you live in London, you kind of learn to just filter stuff, and your short-term memory for stuff that's around you gets smaller. So when you're surrounded by all this information constantly all around you, you just filter more. And maybe, you know, I mean, I live in the Rhondda Valley. There's not an awful lot around here. That's, you know, it's not like in London or in even Cardiff. There's a constant bombardment of information. We don't get that here. So my filters are not so finely developed as other people. And young people who watch, I mean, I don't watch TV either, so they're more exposed to media messages all the time. So they just get more used to switching off. Whereas I don't. I only have the internet, and I kind of absorb everything I think that I see.
Yeah, so just being more sensitive to it because you're not used to it, I guess.
Yeah.
One question we've got left on there that we put across to you, Esther, and I'm really excited to hear what you say to this one. If you could get a book on the curriculum in the education system in school, what book would it be and why?
Right, well, there've been several books throughout my life that I've read, and I've been so like, oh my God, everyone needs to read this book. But I've just read the most incredible book. It's called, you've probably heard of it, Tuesdays with Maury by Mitch Albom.
I know Mitch Albom. I've read his book before.
It's the most amazing book, and I think that it should be definitely vital reading for youngsters. It's all about, and I'm not giving any spoilers here because you only read the first page and you know that this is happening. It's about the last few months of a university professor's life and the conversations that go on between him and one of his favourite students. And it's his last class, he calls it his last class, and he's passing down all this wisdom. And it could be written by a great yogi. You know, it's so in line with everything I've learned about yoga, the lessons that he's passing on about. It's all about gratitude, about appreciating what you have, about love, about compassion, about just enjoying the simple things in life. It's such a beautiful book, and I think that because when you're young, you think, you know, I'm never going to die. You think you're going to live forever. You think nothing, you know, old age is a million years away. But the way that he talks about his youth, and you can really see, because he talks about, you know, you appreciate how he appreciates what he can do because he can do so little, but when he was younger, all the things he could do. And it's just incredible. And I think that if 15, 16-year-olds read that and could really see that they are going to get old, that their bodies will fail them, that there will be things that they can't do as they get older. And it's not even necessarily when you're 70 with a terminal illness, but that aging is an essential part of life. Is the only thing that we're guaranteed in life is that at some point our bodies are going to stop working and we're going to die. And to take away that fear of death as well, this book makes it quite a beautiful thing. It makes death quite beautiful. I cried buckets during the chapter when they're talking about his funeral. I cried and cried. My face hurt. I was crying so much. But it's just the most uplifting book I've ever read. And I think that if youngsters were to read that, I think maybe it might change how they look at their lives. Because when you're in your 20s, you think you've got You've got forever, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I'm 42. How did that happen? And then I know it's going to be another blink and I miss it, and all of a sudden I'll be saying the same thing about being 65. And then you just, it goes so quickly, and you don't realize it. I can't quite work out where the last 20 years have gone. I really can't, and it's frightening. But when I was 20, it is. Yeah, when you're 20, when you're 15, you think you know everything, and you think that 30 is ancient. And so yeah, I think that would be mine. If I could put a book on the curriculum for every single kid to read, they would be that one.
He wrote,
and to have them read it with somebody who can really talk about the issues, really, not just read it and then it's done, but to really talk about it, and to allow them to really talk about how it makes them feel. Because I think it brings up such issues that kids need to know about, that they need to think about, and that they need to realize that right here, right now is the only moment they've got, and they should use it wisely. I think if I'd read it when I was 16, it might have made my life a much different thing.
He wrote a really good book called 5 People You Meet in Heaven.
Yeah, I think I read that one through a couple of tears.
yeah, absolutely. I don't know. It's just the way he's such an engaging writer, and kind of throws perspectives out there within his writing that makes you stop a minute and think, wow, what, you apply it to yourself, don't you, as you're reading it. You're like, wow.
Yeah, it was astonishing. He's a beautiful writer, absolutely beautiful. Yeah.
Great stuff. Well, thanks, Esther. And is there anything else you wanted to put in there, Neil?
No, just to say big thank you for your time, really. Some fascinating stuff in there. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for doing this.
You're very welcome.